All right, guys, I know last week's episode was very, very Captain America Brave New World centric. I'm sure that the film will come up here and there in the future, but I think this will probably be, knock on wood, I don't know, maybe I'll have to record more segments for this podcast, but one of the last segments that we'll talk about Captain America Brave New World in a little bit, because we got Daredevil to look forward to, Thunderbolts to look forward to, and look, I like Captain America Brave New World. I think it's okay, right? I talked about that in my review. You can go check it out in previous episodes, and I did a revisited segment as well. But let's talk about the second weekend box office, because Captain America Brave New World, I usually don't talk about box office until it's all said and done, but this is alarming, and this is something that's worth talking about. So Captain America Brave New World, for those of you who remember, opened on February 14th to about $100 million, $95-ish million opening weekend. For context, and we talked about this before, that's not terrible. It's not obviously close to the top. I mean, the Avengers, films make $200 million, and Avengers Endgame made something like $357 million. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount of money domestically to make. But, some of the lower movies make about $120-ish million, and even lower films make $50 to $70, $80, $90 million. So it's not bad. It's not bad. It's not great. But, I've said this before, that even if Captain America Brave New World had all of the right things going for it within the same shell of the movie, and even if it was received with like a 90% Rotten Tomato score, it had headwinds, right? There are going to be some people who, rightly or wrongly, because there are really bad reasons for not wanting Captain America to be Sam Wilson, to be a black man, right? That just completely wrong reasons. But then there are also just people who are like, well, that's not Steve Rogers, and I grew up with Chris Evans, and I don't know. That guy's Falcon, right? And well, I personally have Captain America will always be firstly and foremostly associated to me as Steve Rogers, because that's just who I grew up with. I have very much accepted, this is Captain America now, and I think that Sam Wilson and Anthony Mackie did a great job in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Captain America Brave New World, two projects that I didn't love, but I think he did a great job. Anyways, there are headwinds going for that. Also, the MCU is just in a decline. It is what it is. Hopefully it'll be on the upswing soon with Thunderbolts, Daredevil Born Again, and Fantastic Four coming up, with Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars on the horizon, and Spider-Man 4. So we'll see. We'll see about that. But headwinds, right? So $100 million in a vacuum is not a bad thing opening weekend domestically. I said during my box office forecasting segments in the Access Blockbusters Pod in previous episodes, and it seems like such a no-duh Captain Obvious thing to say, but I said then, and I think the data now proves it, what will determine Captain America's box office longevity is maybe less of anything else, except for the fact that, it's not that great. And I'm saying this more holistically. I'm not even saying this from my own personal experience. I'm saying this from a critical standpoint. The film has something like a 49 or a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. People generally, and by people I mean critics and some audience members, are generally not as on board with the film as they used to be with other Marvel movies. So taking a look at these objective numbers, Captain America Brave New World took the third biggest opening weekend drop from weekend 1 to weekend 2. Why is this important? The opening weekend percentage drop, it needs a lot of context around it for those of you who haven't been following box office that much. Basically, the film makes the vast majority of its money domestically in the opening weekend. Makes sense, right? Because that's when most people want to see it. That's the excitement, and that's sort of pre-reviews making their way, pre-word of mouth, people saying, oh, it's not good, it is good, you should go check it out, right? That's sort of where the movie will make most of its money, based on pure excitement, and yes, based on critical reaction as well. But it's really important actually to see how it does the second weekend, because that is really more of the word of mouth and how excited people are to see the movie, and how many people who didn't see the movie opening weekend want to see it for this, as soon as possible, and how many people who did see it opening weekend want to see the movie again, right? So generally speaking, the bigger the percentage drop, right, from opening weekend to second weekend, the less good it is. However, there are some exceptions to that, and actually the Marvel movies fall into that exception more often than not, because if you think about it, if a movie makes an astronomically large amount of money in opening weekend, and by that we mean something like 150 to anything higher than 150, 60, 70 million dollars, like, a lot of these Marvel movies make in the $200 million range, and that is a huge amount of money to make opening weekend. That is more than 85, 90, 95% of all movies make in their entire domestic run. That's a big amount of money, right? So, in that regard, if the percentage is big, like let's just say Avengers Endgame makes, or whatever, Avengers 6 or 7 makes $250 million opening weekend, and it takes a 60 to 70% drop. That's still close to $100 million the second weekend. And it doesn't mean that the movie is terrible. It could mean all sorts of things, right? It just means the opening weekend was so big. There's no possible way Avengers Endgame, couldn't have taken a big drop. I don't actually know the exact percentage of Avengers Endgame from weekend 1 to weekend 2. I do know that Spider-Man No Way Home took a massive drop in its first to second weekend. People love the film, but that movie made over $200 million opening weekend. So yes, bigger percentage, generally not a great thing. Bigger percentage drop from weekend 1 to weekend 2, but not the death knell because, these Marvel movies make a ton of money. However, it's not necessary. It's not usually a good thing. So when Captain America Brave New World has the third biggest drop from opening weekend to second weekend, that's not a great thing because Captain America Brave New World's opening weekend was not that high to begin with. It's the combination of those two factors that spell a lot of worrying things for its box office longevity. To put it into context, right, Captain America Brave New World comes ahead of the Marvels in terms of box office drop percentage. The Marvels, amazingly, this is astounding to me because the Marvels made something like $50 or $60 million opening weekend, and it had a 78% drop from weekend 1 to weekend 2. That movie made barely $250 million, I believe. It's crazy. Again, that movie also had a lot of headwinds going against it, but the fact that also it had something like a 60% Rotten Tomatoes, it just wasn't received as well as people would have liked. Unsurprisingly, the next one up is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania with a 69% drop from opening weekend to the second weekend. And that movie was also not received as well. And so, again, it's not great because Captain America Brave New World has made about $289 million worldwide, which, again, for Marvel movies is not the highest, and it really needs to get going because it has a production budget of about $180 million, and to break even, including advertising costs, including marketing, including theater cuts, it has to make about $450 to $500 million to break even, and I don't think it's going to get there. I think this movie optimistically will top out at $400 million, and that's not good. That's really not good. And for those of you who are thinking, well, but even the films like in the Infinity Saga, they didn't make a whole lot of money. Like Ant-Man and the Wasp didn't make a whole lot of money. You're forgetting, though, those movies were all uniformly well received. The lowest critically rated films in the MCU in the Infinity Saga, I think were still in the low 70s in terms of Rotten Tomatoes score. I know Rotten Tomatoes is not perfect. It's not a perfect metric of success. But just as an example, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Incredible Hulk, which was one of the first films and also was one of the lower rated ones. But, other films, right? Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. These are films that still were in the 70s and 80s in terms of critical rating. It is insane. And so even though the MCU has not tanked in terms of having films like in the 20% range, the Kraven the Hunter range, or the Batman v Superman range, the lowest rated film is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I believe, with 43% on Rotten Tomatoes. And that just means less than half the critics liked it, and that's not awful. But it's certainly a step down in quality, and the numbers show it. But here is the good news. If there is a silver lining to this whole thing, Marvel can still come back. You know why? Because people still go to good movies. Case in point, the last MCU movie that came out was Deadpool and Wolverine, and that made over $1 billion because it was a good movie. It was well received. And lest you think, oh, well, Deadpool is so detached from the MCU that it doesn't matter, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 came out right after Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It made almost $900 million because people liked the movie. If Thunderbolts comes out, and yes, there's no denying that if Thunderbolts had come out at a time when the MCU was thriving, it would definitely get a $100 million bump, $200 million bump, and who wouldn't want that, right? But if Thunderbolts comes out, it's rated really well, people really like the movie, it's going to make money. People just want to see good movies. And I that's what I said going into Captain America Brave New World. The biggest factor going into how much money this movie is going to make is if it's good or not. And critics spoke, and they said they didn't really like it. So I'd be very curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think that this is spelling disaster for the MCU in general, or do you think let's just stay the course and let's see where we go from here with Thunderbolts? Let me know in the comments down below.